Good afternoon, everyone. I get a compliant crowd. Thank you so much for joining us both here and online. We're here to talk about generative AI and its impact on justice. And we've assembled a great panel for you to answer all your questions on the subject. Of course, we're going to hear from them, reflecting their own individual interests in the field. But just by way of background, I find it amazing that when we assembled here last time, ChatGPT hadn't yet been launched. And it was a couple of weeks after we had this meeting last year that this system came onto the market. And I've been working in AI and law for 40 years. I wrote my PhD in AI and law in the 80s. And I'm very clear that ChatGPT was the single most amazing development I've seen in the world of AI. I think it's still very early days. I still think we're in the foothills, but we've certainly seen a great leap ahead, both in the technology and I suspect people's interest in the technology. And what we want to do today is discuss the impact today and looking forward of this remarkable technology on how it is that we access justice. And ChatGPT, of course, being one example of a category of AI system that is now referred to as generative AI, and we'll be hearing more on the definitions very shortly. I stress again, I think this is the beginning of a conversation rather than the final conversation. My own view, and it is a personal view, is that it'll be within 5 years. I think these systems will be sufficiently safe and reliable for direct use in law by people who are non-lawyers. Although the systems are remarkable today, I think we've got some way to go before we can confidently unleash them on the public. But we can very access to justice. And that in many ways is our purpose in convening, to look at the advantage of this, to look at the shortcomings, to hear from you also about your own personal experiences. So how we're going to organize ourselves is this. We have 4 superb speakers, 3 at the table and 1 in the West Coast, by which I don't mean Glasgow, I mean California. And each is going to introduce themselves and spend a few minutes telling us about their own particular interest, perspective, and conclusions about generative AI in respect of justice. After that, what we're going to do is have a Q&A session. And I want to organize that in 3 parts. I want to spend a little bit of time hearing from you about your own personal experiences. And for those of you who are watching remotely, we would welcome your input as well. The second thing we want to focus on is the risks, the harms, the concerns, and have an honest and frank conversation about that. But I prefer to finish on a high note. So the third part of the Q&A, we'll talk about the opportunities and how this is a good thing for those of us who are passionate about access to justice. So that's the story. We have Jay, we have Uwais, we have Renate, and we have Margaret. And what I want to do, first of all, is hand over to Uwais, who's going to speak about his own background, but also give us an introduction to the basic concept of AI. And from then on, we're passing the baton along the table. Uwais, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Uwais Iqbal. I come from a background as an AI practitioner. So I've worked as a data scientist, a machine learning engineer across the legal tech industry for over half a decade now. And I've spent time building these systems and developing them to a point where they can actually be rolled out in production. So I come from a viewpoint of pragmatism in terms of practicality, what it means to design these systems and what it means to actually build them in a way where they can be used. Recently, I started a company called Simplexico. We've been focusing on AI consultancy for the legal sector. So we offer a range of services and we focus primarily on education, helping people understand AI through to designing use cases, through to actually building them out. And we're currently running a short course on AI with the Royal Institution. I think if there's anything I've learned from working with lawyers, it's that it's always a good place to start with definitions. And with everyone speaking about AI, I don't think many people have actually got a working definition in mind, which is a big problem. And I think that makes the conversation much harder because people are speaking about different things, and we can't actually pin down what we're speaking about and how that can have an impact on the legal industry and the justice sector. So I think a good place to always start is to think about how we can define AI. I like to use a definition where we can think about AI as a as a technique where we want to use machines to try and mimic what humans can do when it comes to problem solving or decision making. So as humans, there's very naturally things we can do. I can read a book, I can look around me, I can identify within my sphere of visual perception, there's a glass on the table, there's a chair in front of me, there's a beautiful crowd eagerly listening and wanting to learn about AI. I can do all of that because in my mind I'm running cognitive processes which allow me to understand and perceive and break down what I'm seeing from my visual imagery and from the data being input. Now, what we're trying to do with AI systems is think about how we can mimic what humans can do very naturally in a way where we can shift some of those tasks and some of those cognitive processes to machines. So the idea around AI is around mimicry. So humans, very naturally, we can do these things. How do we get to a space where we can now think about using machines to try and do some of these things? So that's a brief introduction to AI. We could talk about AI for days and days, but I think it's important to understand where generative AI fits into the equation. So with generative AI, I like to explain it by way of analogy with daydreaming. So if you're not enjoying this talk or today or this session, what you might end up doing is you might end up staring out the window and start daydreaming. And when you're daydreaming, what are you actually doing? You're calling on things in your memory that you've experienced before, and you're constructing them in a way where you can combine them and compose them to form new images and new experiences, which are much, much more interesting than listening to me talk, for example. So with generative AI, we've mimicked this meta or higher level cognitive process in machines. So now what we can do is we can teach these machines through lots of data and lots of examples, for example, what images look like, so that these machines, when you go and ask them to draw an image of a friend's house in Euston Square, it can pull out from its memory, from its bank of images it's been trained on, images of friend's house, compose them in a particular way and generate a new image. So what we're doing with generative AI is this entire enterprise around mimicry, how we can mimic what humans do when it comes to daydreaming. And what's interesting is that the types of things which generative AI now enable actually have a significant overlap with the things lawyers tend to do on a day-to-day basis, which is now where the interest is coming from in the legal industry. So if you think about on a day-to-day basis, lawyers spend lots of time doing things like drafting, things like summarizing information, things like extracting information, things like labeling information. Now we can step into a world where rather than having to rely on humans to do that work, we can step into a world where we can try and see if machines can take on some of that labor so that humans can actually do something more interesting. And if we think about the legal industry and how the dynamic of the economics of the legal industry, part of the problem with access to justice has always been the limitation of supply, in that we don't have enough skilled expertise, enough trained lawyers to be able to fill the demand of need when it comes to access to justice. Now, what AI can enable in the future, and hopefully we'll shed light on in this discussion, is that if we're able to use machines, what we can effectively do is remove the bottleneck which comes from the supply side and see how we can use machines to scale expertise and capture expertise in a way where we can provide these services for much, much cheaper to a wider population and provide them easier access. So generative AI is something significant, and it's not just hype, and it's something to keep in mind. But I think with anything, when it comes to a new technology, we have to start by understanding the technology and educating ourselves about it before jumping 10 steps ahead and trying to imagine a world where we're using these AI systems on a day-to-day basis. So that's just a few thoughts from me, and I'll pass it over.
And thank you very much. And over now to Renate.
Hi, can you all hear me at the back? Okay, I'll pop that down. Well, I mean, half of what I was going to say has just been beautifully articulated by Uwais ahead of me. So I'm going to actually make this a bit more about people. First of all, I'm Renate Samson. I'm an associate director at the Lovelace Institute. I run a directorate, a group of researchers evidencing the impact of data-driven technology and AI on people and society, specifically within public services, social justice, rather than specifically the justice sector, and also areas such as education and health. We put a paper out earlier on this year about foundation models, another term for generative AI, the AI on which we can build services and systems. That does an awful lot of the explanation that we've just heard, explains what these tools could be used for. And as we've just heard as well, and I very much appreciate Richard's comment also, that at present these tools can be used to do kind of back office territory, synthesizing data, drafting documents, translating information, summarizing information, and in some parts checking it. So we always need the human in the loop to check that the system has created something that's accurate. That paper's been enormously successful in outlining what foundation models are, but what we also did was look at how they're actually being used already within public services. And in truth, it's pretty disparate, it's pretty inconsistent. These technologies have been around for 40, 50 years in some form or another, but most of the time what we're talking about is data. We're talking about data-driven systems rather than artificial intelligence systems. But the ChatGPT that was launched this time last year has kind of shifted the game. It's much bigger, it's much faster, it uses much greater data, and it's more predictive about the word that comes next than the many traditional data systems. So the use of this is now embedded within many of our day-to-day services, such as Microsoft or Google, and you may not even be aware a lot of the time that you're using an artificial intelligence. Every time you write a text message, that word that comes up next, that's apparently artificial intelligence. So we're using it everywhere. But what the opportunities for it are still very much nascent. And a lot of what we've heard today is about challenges with regards to data, particularly within the legal system. A lot of it's siloed, a lot of it's not very clean, and what by that I mean ordered or labelled or accessible or accurate or timely. We have huge amounts of data sets that may be sat in one place, but a lot of the data may be old and therefore not brilliant for being put into a system to help outline or create an output that would be of benefit. So with that in mind, we have to really think about what data we've got. That's a large part of Natalie, who sat at the front of his work. But a lot of the conversation today about how do we use the data that we've already got to put it in a system that we've just heard about to create an output that will be beneficial to all of society. And as I said, I want to talk about people. People are core to all of this. Technologists can sit and come up with an amazing idea for a piece of technology that will solve all the problems that technologists have defined. Data experts will we need all the data in order to be able to create the tech to solve the problem of who needs what benefit where, who needs what solution where. But very rarely are people asked about what they need. And a large part of the work that we do at ADA is talking to people about what systems they want and how they want to be impacted by them. So, for example, in the healthcare sector, there's been a real push, certainly since COVID, to have digital technologies that will enable people greater access to their doctor. We all may have an app on our telephone that enables us to create a doctor's appointment or to order a prescription. That may work brilliantly for some of us, and it may work terribly for others. We heard in the first session this morning about the sheer levels of poverty that are now in this country and the massive intersectional vulnerabilities that people experience. Whilst data can help identify who's in trouble, who may need help, a system predicting who that might be might not get it actually right. And indeed, identifying what the multiple problems an individual or a family may have may not be something that a technology is able to do, because in truth, people aren't very good at that. We've heard how AI is potentially going to mimic how people work. We're pretty good if you ask us, do you want a cup of tea? Yes or no. But if you ask us to solve the complexities of an individual or a group's troubles, that takes an awful lot of time, trust, relationship building, and listening to one another. When a system can do that, we may be onto something, but we've got a long way to go. But in order to build a system or systems that will enable the data to benefit people, as I've just outlined, we really need people to be at the heart of that. So my give to you, and I hope the takeaway for everybody here and at this conference is, yes, AI is happening. It's happening in all sorts of amazing ways, and the future is probably going to be very, very bright. But it has problems in it that are the problems of society: bias, misinformation, issues with regards to privacy, handling of sensitive data, and making sure that the data you've got is clean and efficient and correct. But more to the point, we need to ensure that these systems are built to enable people to have the opportunities that they want, whether it's access to real, honest, true, meaningful guidance, whether it's the ability to be triaged through to a solicitor or a lawyer who's going to be able to help them, or whether it's simply being put in touch with somebody who's going to listen and build trust and understand the complexity of someone's problem, rather than just try and identify it through a data decision tree. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Moving now on to Jay.
Yeah, I'm going to use the microphone because I do not have your projection. Hi everyone, I'm Jay Bangle. I'm the Chief Technology Innovation Officer at TPXimpact. We're a digital transformation company. I was also previously the CTO at HMCTS. So when we're advising our clients on AI and generative AI specifically, we tend to break down the opportunities into two categories: indirect and direct. So we've heard about the kind of back office opportunity. That's what I mean by indirect. And that's absolutely where we need to be focusing. So if we take those kind of institutions, those organizations, they have finite resources, they're incredibly pressured, but they're also knowledge organizations. They work on individual and institutionalized knowledge. Apologies, sorry. Generative AI can really help when it comes to knowledge access. And it can help make these organizations more productive, efficient, and also adhere to process. So if we're focusing on the opportunities of generative AI, actually it's about helping to make sure those organizations can work faster, work better, and actually hopefully do more. So imagine a Gen AI system that analyzes case material, flagging critical actions, ensuring no step is missed, and therefore preventing costly errors, which can obviously be incredibly stressful for all those involved, but also take up more valuable resource within an organization. This isn't just about cutting costs, it's about expanding reach and serving more people. But trust is critical, we've heard that. Transparency is critical. And these organizations require really clear, responsible AI frameworks to operate upon, to protect the fundamentals and the fabrics of society and for justice. Then we can talk about the direct consumer opportunities. We're not quite there yet, I think we can agree, but it's around the corner. And actually there are services today that you can use. AI lawyers, $20 a month, wouldn't recommend them, but they show the opportunity and they show what's coming. So let's take a few examples of what they might be used for. A direct AI-based legal advice service at a low cost, something which we've heard, the cost of living crisis is a real problem. So at, potentially £10, £20 a month, these services might be an alternative. Something to review the latest version of a contract and point out the important changes, the drafting of legal material, or tailored guidance from HMCTS or other institutions that really understand you as a person and what you were trying to get at. And of course, dispute resolution is a huge angle. But all of these services offered direct to consumers have the potential of empowering people to exercise their rights by alleviating a major problem: knowledge. They provide people with knowledge. And yes, there is work to be done, but that's the potential, is enabling these individuals to get access to something that they have to pay for and they can't afford. So despite the incredibly impressive advances, AI can give advice, draft contracts, review legal documents. There are risks, of course. With no regulation or accreditation, there's no guarantee for consumers that they will receive information that is current, information that is correct. If a law firm is providing that service, then maybe, because they've got internal processes which maybe will protect against that. But if it's a law tech or a startup, someone who isn't in the legal field, not so sure. An outdated advice isn't just useless, it's potentially dangerous, right? And can undermine access to justice. So we must strive for a balance between innovation, matched with the reality, especially when private organizations are concerned, delivering these services, where Gen AI is not only empowering, but responsible.
Thank you so much. And now, beamed in from California is Margaret Hagan. Margaret, whose work I've admired for many years. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can indeed. Over to you now.
Great. Hi, everyone. So I'm Margaret. I am a lawyer by training. For the past 10 years, I've run an R&D lab at Stanford Law School and Design School called the Legal Design Lab. And over the past year, we've noticed the trend in AI and kind of the hype cycle that's going on, especially here in Silicon Valley. So we've really focused on talking to everyday people about both their appetite for using artificial intelligence for legal problem solving when they're faced with an eviction notice or a debt collection lawsuit or thinking about getting divorced. So we've been interviewing people, both intercepting them in court waiting rooms and also recruiting them online, and asking to watch over their shoulder as they try to use an AI tool like ChatGPT, Google Bard, Microsoft Bing Chat to deal with a fictional legal problem. And what we've found is that people, even if we as lawyers hope that we can keep the genie in the bottle until it's ready and safe and high performing, the genie is out already. And the appetite is there very strongly, especially after people try AI for the first time. We see a big difference. Many of our people that we've intercepted or interviewed have heard of AI on the news, are aware of these new bots. They haven't necessarily tried it. Once they ask a question, my landlord did this to me, do I have any rights? Is it true that in California I can get kicked out in 2 weeks if I've still paid my rent? And they get a very cleanly formatted, authoritative seeming answer instantaneously and for free from this well-respected corporation, be it Google or Microsoft or now OpenAI. The value and the trust they have in AI after that first interaction goes from 2 out of 6 to 6 out of 6, or 0 out of 6 to 4 out of 6. When they see that instant, reliable seeming answer, their eyes light up. And we've interviewed many people who have integrated AI into their life problem solving and especially legal problem solving with awareness that there might be hallucinations and mistakes, but for that instant free gratification of getting a clearly formatted and even if it's 65% right or 75% right of the time, they're willing to make that bargain because it's just so convenient and gives them what they want, a kind of short statement of the law, clear actionable next steps, and a list of organizations to get in contact with. So I think the consumer revolution is already happening. Obviously, we're also interested in quality. So we're setting up audits to see how often these different kinds of hallucinations and mistakes and possible harms are happening. But what's really come through very clearly from our interviews is that when we interview legal aid lawyers, they're very worried about the harms and the dangers. When we talk to many people in the public, they're willing to work with the system even if there are mistakes and harms because of that free, instant access to legal information and guidance. They're willing often to make that trade. So I think the consumer revolution in legal access is happening now, even if we're not steering it right now. So there's a lot of work to be doing on the policy side.
Thank you very much, Margaret. So let me just try and capture or summarize a few things we've heard. The first is that ChatGPT and similar search systems are clearly useful today as efficiency tools, productivity tools for lawyers, for people involved in legal advice giving. The technology is already available here and now, very useful. The second thing that perhaps is on more of our minds is when will it be that these systems can safely help people understand and enforce their entitlements? And I think the joint view is we're not there yet, but what we've just heard from Margaret is, and this may surprise some or many of us, that there's an appetite for such free, instantaneously available guidance. And in part on that last point, the chat aspect of ChatGPT in particular is so very good. I know when I use it, I find myself saying please and thank you. And I feel like apologizing to it when I ask the same daft question again and again, but it does give the sense that something that frankly very few computer scientists were anticipating a year ago was a level of interactivity and mimicking of human conversation that actually puts human beings at their ease. And this brings both benefits and burdens to us. So I think we can all have a shared vision of a system that's very easy to use and that in principle can help people. But one of the things we need to talk about is how we put the safeguards in place so that we can responsibly use this kind of technology. With that in mind, what I want to do now, we've got about half an hour left, so perhaps 10 minutes for each subject. I wanted to start just getting a sense in the room. Put your hands up if you've used ChatGPT. And I would say that's maybe 2/3, 3/4 of the audience, a significant number of you. To those who haven't used, over the weekend, log on, have a go, and your jaw will drop. It's almost 200 million users in less than a year. It's a remarkable phenomenon. What I thought we could start off with in the Q&A is just hearing, and this can be on any aspect of the technology at all, hearing some personal experiences of using the system that might cast light on what we're here to discuss, which is how can we use this to empower non-lawyers to help understand and enforce their entitlements. Now, why don't we start with Natalie? It would help if you don't mind saying who you are and what you're interested in, or your background, or the organisation of which you're part. But if you don't want to, that's not a problem either. And why don't we use roving mic?
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Natalie Byron. I'm a member of the CJC. So I used ChatGPT to try and access information about legal information as a research exercise. And one of the things, so in the UK, government charitable foundations, they've invested multiple millions of pounds in putting high quality legal information and content online, so things, citizens' advice, think law for life. But one of the things that I found when I used ChatGPT was that it doesn't tell you its sources. It doesn't tell you, where the information came from. And in that context, some of what it returned wasn't quite correct, but that not citing its sources seemed really interesting to me and quite concerning, because there's a real potential in that case that we could disrupt the legal information ecosystem that we already know is so fragile, and all of that money that we've spent in trying to make sure people get good quality content could be wasted. So I wanted to ask Margaret and the other panelists, do you have any suggestions for how that problem might be overcome? And if you're sat in the government seat and you're interested in creating these streamlined pathways to quality content, what do you need to be doing? Is it a conversation with the companies? Like, what are the answers?
Let's start with Margaret.
Yeah, I think my first hunch is kind of the backroom policy making with the technology company, kind of model builders and product managers and designers who decide that, because we do have a variety of kind of big public facing models, and Microsoft Bing Chat of the main ones is the one that has citations, has the links out to the web sources that it's been drawing from. There's good things and bad things. Many users find that very cluttered to have all these hyperlinks and things. So if you talk strictly about usability, ChatGPT is so clean, not all of this crowded visual signaling. But when we talk to legal aid lawyers, they always rate the Bing Chat with the citations out, exactly which website this came from, and lets you trace, okay, a lot of stuff is coming from commercial blogs with no legal experts on staff. Or, okay, many of these answers are coming from local legal experts, so we probably did a good job. With ChatGPT and with Google Bard, we don't have that citation trail. So we need to have meetings, if not also public reports and journalistic coverage, to put pressure on the technology companies to spotlight that there is this information ecosystem, they're not doing a good job, and that they need to rise. That's usually the way to get large technology companies to change, is either the accountability pressure from journalist coverage or from kind of regulatory agencies. And then they're more likely to take meetings, cooperate, and think about special treatment for this domain of problems.
Thank you, Margaret. Jay, I think you would like to comment.
Yeah, I think we need to think about the difference between consumer versus enterprise or generic versus specific. So, you know, ChatGPT is designed for hundreds of millions of users. It's designed to be as generic as it possibly can be. But if you're talking about a dedicated research tool, or, you know, in my example, something used inside a law firm, that needs to be designed for that specific scenario. It needs to be grounded in that organization's data and all the citations that come with it, and ultimately instructs the system to only answer based upon the institutionalized information it's provided to, not to use what's been trained in the model, but to say, use that to understand the world. But actually, when you answer me, only use the information I'm going to give you access to. And I think that's the key difference between consumer versus enterprise or specific that we need to remember when we're talking about these capabilities, because we wouldn't deploy ChatGPT into a law firm. We would deploy the underlying model with all the protections and systems around the outside, like we would in any kind of digital ecosystem.
Uwais.
I think we have to make a distinction between three things. One is the technology layer. The second is the applications which make use of that technology. And the third is the use of those applications. So if you think about this building, for example, we have a supply of electricity which runs into the building. And then on top of that electricity, we have a number of electrical appliances. We have the speakers, we have the monitor, we have the lights, etc. And then we're using those applications in different ways. So I like to use this analogy where ChatGPT is like the microwave of the AI world. It's this mass market consumer tool which anyone can use, anyone can access. So previously everybody was cooking with wood and fire manually, but now everyone's got access to a microwave, so it's blown everyone's minds. But if you're running a Michelin-star kitchen, you're not going to just use a consumer microwave. You're going to be using a specialized set of industrial tools to actually kind of get to your purpose. So to Jay's point around making a distinction between what are general purpose consumer applications versus what are specialized industrial applications is really important. And I think where the legal industry is, or where people are at the moment, is they're trying to cook everything in the microwave. They're trying to get ChatGPT to do everything. Whereas what we need to do is take a step back and realize this is one application built on the technology and say, hey, these are our needs as the legal community, or as users and consumers of legal information, and we need specialized applications which meet certain requirements. But in order to do that, we have to start informing those design decisions from the process where those applications are being constructed and built. So rather than post hoc, ad hoc, getting a microwave and trying to add on some kind of like weird mutations on top of it so it gives us what gives us what we want, going back to the design stage and informing the design process of those applications.
Thank you for that. So we have another question here, possibly about microwaves, possibly not.
I'm Victoria, I'm from the Employment Legal. Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm from the Employment Legal Advice Network, which is funded by Trust for London, and I actually chair a working group within that on AI and tech in the workplace. And the reason is because, well, there's two reasons. The first is that obviously the workplace is changing at a rate that none of us can possibly keep up with. If Elon has his way, we won't actually be working soon. But anyway, it is changing so fast with, and yet our sector of employment advisors in the not-for-profit sector has barely got a computer that works, frankly, let alone being aware of the fact that AI is being used to determine where jobs are being placed into advertising, and algorithms being determining whether someone's doing their job fast enough. So it's like obviously a huge perspective from the sort of employment rights world. But we're also looking at the way it can be used, because there's no legal aid for employment advice. There's not going to be any legal aid for employment advice, and the funding is really reliant on a small number of funders. So there are solutions, and we know that. And there are some coming, mostly driven from the for-profit sector, that we sometimes feel do not meet the standards that we would want in terms of, for example, like if you go on there and you say you've got a problem, it might generate you a grievance letter. And actually, we think that's going in way too fast. You should be perhaps educated on how to have a difficult conversation with your boss first, and not how to raise a grievance. So we're having conversations in our little group around, should there be like a 10-point thing that law centres or other not-for-profit organisations are thinking about when they're looking at these proposals that are quite often floated in front of them, and they look really great and they look like they could provide all these really speedy solutions. And we don't know who owns that kind of leadership, but we'd love to find out. I'd love you to come and tell us like where we begin on that. But then the other thing is, just in terms of my own use of ChatGPT, in the absence of a properly funded advice sector and employment rights, people aren't actually going to the lovely organisations that you're all building. They're going online. I've spent a lot of time, sadly, quite sad, on this Facebook group called the Employment Law UK employment, it was like 30, 40,000 people asking each other questions and employment advice and giving really bad answers. And I spend a lot of time referring them on to what I think are reputable organisations giving free legal advice. And so what I've started to do for fun really, and also to determine quality, is take some of those questions and put them into ChatGPT and just see whether the answer is actually better than what they're getting on Facebook. And I have to say, they're already better. That's without being educated, because the answers are so bad online. So I feel like in the absence of technology that's being developed specifically for that sector, people are going to poor places anyway, and we need to be really quick about building something for that sector particularly, because behind every person needing housing advice and everything else is someone who's not got money from a good job.
Just
Renate.
Actually, your points align with the first question, really. The foundation model AI in public services paper that we wrote proposes that technologies should be built that adhere to the standards in public life. So that touches upon where we're at, like what's that subjectivity, it's accountability, it's transparency, it's honesty, amongst others. Not knowing where your advice is coming from ChatGPT can be very unnerving. But if it's giving you something that's more accurate because it's effectively using an enormous data set, that's great. But we want to know what that enormous data set is, and we don't yet. So going forward, to ensure that these technologies are built in a way that are transparent and are accountable, companies should be required to explain these things, whether that's a transparency report or not. That already exists for a lot of social media companies. Whether they adhere to it or not is a different matter. But also standards, also definitions of use. I mean, you know, if you want to build a system, you may be able to procure one off the shelf, ChatGPT, or you may be able to build on that foundation of GPT, which enables you to build a service that will be relevant to your users. Understanding what you need the service for, who your users are, and what engagement they're going to have with it is going to be a really important critical step for everybody who wants to build here. ChatGPT really is, as Richard said, it's very much the start. We're at the start of this conversation, but we do have to look at the regulation we've already got, particularly around data protection and particularly around competition, to ensure that the systems we're going to build are safe and secure, but also adhere to the standards of public life, for example, so that we can trust the systems that we use.
Thank you very much. Let's have one more question, and I'll have it from the back. Sorry, I get criticised the other day for only taking questions from one side of the room, and I wasn't sure what bias I was exhibiting there, but it's taught me that I don't want to be front room biased. So back room.
Senior and mediator. I was listening to a podcast with Professor Solomon. He was mentioning chatbots that have the integrity filters built in, and also he was talking about empathy. And he's building particularly one with Sensible Pi. So I went on and had a look, and I guess what amazed me as a mediator was it was using a lot of the skills which mediators were using. So it was reframing, it was paraphrasing, it was summarizing, it was reflecting back my emotions, obviously in verbal form. And you know, I found myself quite enjoying the conversation. And I'm just wondering how far away is it that those sort of bots, or those sort of abilities could take over my job, I guess.
I had this experience where I asked the system to draft a letter of condolence to a friend whose father had died. It was an experiment, it hadn't happened. But in reading it back, and it was partly because my own father had passed away not long before that, but in reading it back, it brought tears to my eyes. And I actually thought, that is amazing. I'm reading the output of a system. What is the phenomenon that's making me feel like that? And we don't even have a name for that. Where if it was another human being, we'd be talking about empathy and so forth, but that's not what's going on there. And yet the sensation is very real. So we have to recalibrate how it is we feel when we're interacting with these machines. Uwais.
So I think it's important to go back to that definition. So what these AI systems are fundamentally doing is mimicking. So in that process of generating that AI system, what they've done in that data set is they've curated data of those types of interactions so that the machine can learn how to reframe, cast back emotions, and do things a mediator would do. So I think what's interesting is that we're in this mode of where we're just consuming AI applications, where what we're doing is we have tools like ChatGPT or things other people are building, predominantly large tech organizations for mass market consumer use, and we're just consuming them, right? And I think for specialized verticals like legal, where requirements are different, there are higher bars of standards, there are requirements around transparency and data provenance and all of these things. We have to step into a world of how do we actually think about creating these systems in a way where they actually fit the needs and the requirements of what we have in the legal industry. And all of that comes back to what data is available and whether or not there are initiatives to create those data sets and those foundations for which other people can then use to build different tools and applications across the ecosystem.
Yeah. All of this subject, of course, to the observation that the genie is already out of the bottle and people are already using these systems. And it's what economists call a credence good. And a credence good is a good where the user is not qualified to know about the quality or otherwise of what they're receiving. That's the fundamental difficulty, which leads me therefore to the second part of our Q&A. And don't all rush at once, but it's what are the harms, risks, concerns in this area? Is that someone right to the back? So back of room bias. Here we go.
In terms of the risks, and actually, which is a bit of a challenge to you, I'm afraid. So I've been building Gen AI practically most of the pattern for it that uses court theory for transcription. And we built a data set using the only available court audio for public consumption, which is in the National Archives. Now, if I were to build this technology in the States, I would have tens of hundreds of thousands of hours to choose. And in the UK, I have about 50. Now, my investors are saying to me, why are you even bothering with the UK market? You should be going on to the US, where you can build this product and take it off very much easier. So my question is, for the entrepreneurs and master thinkers and even the endorsement and everyone else who wants to really use this technology, how are we going to be able to get access to that lovely, clean, structured data, particularly in the legal sector, that's going to make us help us create value?
And you say it for me because I sit in the senior data governance panel. But of course, I'm not the only person who sits in that panel here. Natalie as well. Natalie is far better in this issue than I am. But actually, Natalie is genuinely a specialist. Would you like to answer that?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I think that
we should maybe have the microphone.
Thank you, Sophie. It's lovely to see you again. I mean, I think one of the challenges that we have in which makes England and Wales so uniquely different and difficult for kind of innovation, all these things, is the huge inequalities and asymmetries that we've allowed to develop in terms of access to legal information. And what I mean by that is access to case law, access to transcripts, access to judgments. So much of this information isn't in the public domain. It's actually held behind paywalls by the private publishers. And that gives them a huge incumbent advantage when it comes to developing these tools, which is an access to justice risk in itself, because it means that the tools are likely to only serve to benefit those who've already got large data sets. So think big insurance companies, publishers I've already mentioned. In terms of how do we get from where we are now to something better, I think the decision to create a repository at the National Archive was a good decision in terms of placing that data into kind of public hands, and work needs to go on to really make sure that that becomes a complete record. But then when it comes to the question about who gets to access that data and for what purposes do they get to use it for, I fundamentally believe that one of the things we're really lacking in the justice sector is a role for the public and public voice and listening to what they think is acceptable when it comes to using data. Because the fact is, if we move beyond where the public are when it comes to acceptability of data use, we've lost the whole thing. You lose the mandate, and Renate can tell you about how that's happened in health and other sectors. We did some public attitudes research. It was really looking at how the public feels about commercial or third-party access to data held in court records. And to be honest, it was, in line with other studies, favoured strong controls and regulations, increased transparency about who gets access for what purposes, and applications with proven public rather than private benefit. But we need much more of, like, that was just a temperature check at a point in time. You know, generative AI, as Margaret described, has changed that landscape. People want to use these tools. And so I think what we need is standing forum to actually enable us to get better understanding of where the public are when it comes to how they feel about, because I think that's because people might like the product, but I don't think they recognise that the product is built on data that is about them, that contains things that they might feel to be, you know, in some way personal. So that's not an easy answer, but I think it comes back to mature governance frameworks, transparency, and increased role for the public.
I think it's also fair to say that government policy on this issue hasn't crystallised yet. My own inclination is the personal view, and it's one I encourage. I would always be liberal at the point of distribution, but restrictive in use, rather than restrictive in the point of distribution. And that's because of my background. I chaired a Bangle in public sector information. I've grown to believe it is the default setting should be making it available, but we might want to, in areas that have great social significance, restrict how that data is used. That's my personal view. It's the view I try to press forward. I think, Natalie, you're pretty similar to that as well. Let's have another question about concerns. Okay, one nearer the front. She started thinking about it.
Thank you. Tim Powell from the Property Chamber. My view is that the open AI based on the internet is inherently insecure and inaccurate. And although it might be, I think it was 75% accurate, or it might get up to 95% accurate, ultimately, it's only as good as the data set. And we know what the internet's like. It's full of untruths. My impression is that the internet's getting worse. And I think that is a trend that will continue. So it seems to me that as lawyers and advisors, judges, we need to have a closed, authenticated, peer-reviewed set of information upon which AI can operate, so that we get a truth, not an internet truth or an internet untruth. Now, whether such a tool can be produced and we let members of the public use it also to get the truth is another question. But I think the internet, the current ChatGPT and all the open AI is not the way to go for us. We need not open AI, but closed AI, so that we exclude all the increasing untruths on the internet.
Renate.
Yeah, I to give room for another question, I think truth is a really interesting concept right now, and yes, as we were saying earlier, if you can't identify where the answer coming from ChatGPT is based on, then how can you actually take it seriously? And an awful lot of what we've heard, and your point was brilliant, that we're responding to a mimic. It makes us feel an emotion. All the way back to in the 70s, when they created a computer therapist, it would say, "Hi, how are you?" You say, "Oh, I'm very well." "Oh, you're very well." "Yeah, not so bad. Actually, I had a bit of an awkward journey on my way to work." "Oh, did you? You had an awkward journey on the way." So it's about answering your question with your question. Where's the truth there? It's your truth all the way back to the core. It's a really important point. Like, we aren't talking at the moment because we're blindsided by the excitement of AI. I think as that calms down, we're going to end up back having the fundamental questions that we've been having for the last 20 years, if not longer, about where's the data coming from, how's the data going to be used, how's the data accurate or otherwise, who should have access, who shouldn't, what happens when it's data about us that is being used to inform a decision about somebody else. All these questions have not been resolved. These questions are going to be even more fundamental to the conversation about AI going forward.
Strangely, though, the question to some extent, as Margaret was saying, of user experience has been resolved. And that, I think, has taken many of us by surprise, that empirically it does seem that people are quite comfortable using these systems, and one can see why. Let's have one more question at the front here of concerns, and then we'll be upbeat.
Actually, you're going to get two questions. One for Margaret. Of the people that you researched who said that they were happy to use ChatGPT and it produced a 65% right answer, did your research also tell you whether, if this was not an exercise and it was a real case, they would want to sue someone as a result of being one of the 35%? And if so, what's the view about that? That's the first question. Second question, it's not just about the data set you use. If you're an LIP or a member of the public, it's how you ask the question. And one of the things that strikes me clearly, if you come from the north of England, is if you talk to someone from Yorkshire or Lancashire or Cumbria or Northumberland, you will get a different question or a different way of asking that question. So it's really important that the questions are also looked at, as well as the data set that's processing them. And I think that's a nuanced situation that hasn't really been looked at, perhaps as thoroughly as it should be.
Okay, let's take both of these. Margaret, over to you.
Sure. The people that we were interviewing regularly compared the quality of the AI not to the quality of an ideal lawyer interaction with all of the expectations of quality, of reliability. They were comparing it mainly to Google search, which at least in our population here in the US, but across demographic groups, Google search has become the go-to first step, that across the board, even if people said, I'm not a tech person, they kept saying, I'm really good at Google searching. They were comparing the AI results mainly to the quality of Google search. And what they've been trained with Google search is you can't always trust the first thing. You've got to hunt around. Maybe you trust the first result, but you're going to not assume that it's correct. So they were taking a similar approach to their AI results. They weren't saying, if the AI gives me to an organization in the wrong state, or quotes the law to me. We asked them explicitly, what would you do if you found out that the law you've just said, this is awesome, turns out to be wrong, and you show up to court? At least in the interview setting, they were saying, okay, well, I'll adapt. I'll go back and I'll keep researching, but it was my fault for not double checking it. They weren't expecting it to be gospel the way they might expect if they were sitting across the table from a lawyer. That said, we need to see how that would play out in practice, but in the research setting, that's what they said.
Thank you very much. Now, as to the question of regional differences, did anyone want to comment? Uwais.
So going back to the microwave analogy,
I rather thought you might say
it's learning how to use the microwave, right? So I think with electrical appliances, and the internet, we very intuitively, through lived experience, learned how to use these tools. And ChatGPT has been around for less than 12 months. And people are still learning how to use these tools. So I think there has to be at least some level of fundamental AI education across the population, so that to ensure competency and to ensure that when people are using these tools, they're competent in using these tools in a way where they can get out what they need, but they understand that this is not a legal expert, this is not legal advice. And now with some of the prompting that comes out, you get an output saying, if you ask a legal question, please make sure you speak to a legal advisor. So I think part of it is education, and I think part of it is realizing that this is just a tool that's been trained on a particular data set, but then people need to understand what the limitations of the microwave are, so they don't try and cook something in the microwave, which the microwave can't even cook in the first place.
So the situation is, I've been asked to stop this slightly under the hour because it was running late, but what I'd like to do is one quick question or one quick final observation on a good thing, if anyone would like. There's a hand right to the back. You can only see the hand, so it'll be that hand. I want to give you a 30-second thought and then I'll thank everyone. But if you're desperate for refreshments, I won't be offended if you run out. It's Carolyn.
Well, so I mean that sort of plays into the reason why the fact that people describe their experience in very, very different ways. None of us know that. Anyone can be involved in the process errors. So people in very, very different ways. So what can we learn from the Bangle experience?
Would anyone like to comment on Babylon or the more general observation? Well, I think the next generation of systems will be more interactive to the extent they'll be asking us questions, because it's the great GP when you describe the symptoms said, you've not been in East Africa recently, or just has that thought that you would never put forward as someone because you don't know by definition what the nature of your problem is. And I think we'll see a generation of systems that are more interactive, and presumably we will be able to recognize an accent and respond to the vernacular accordingly. Uwais.
So I don't want to take up too much time of me speaking.
We've got such a second.
So I think you can flip that on its head, because I think it's interesting, because in the Indian context, they're doing a lot of work around access to justice, and the government's funding a lot of startups and involvement for building technology for access to justice. And their demographic is really interesting because they have lots of different languages, regional languages that people speak. And a lot of the population isn't educated to a point where they can actually use digital devices. So now AI systems have removed the bottleneck when it comes to being competent digitally, so that people can actually speak their mother tongue to these systems and actually interact with them. So I think there's almost two sides of the coin, that sometimes these AI systems might not be good at regional accents, but if there's a direction where these models can be tuned and optimized, then potentially you could open up for other languages, working with migrants, working with refugees, etc., so that it's more accessible in that way.
I think we have to be very careful that we don't use technology to replace relationships and to replace nuance and to replace people's autonomy to be able to say a question that they might be a bit embarrassed about first of all, and then have a person on the other side start to slowly tease out what the person's really getting at. And that's part of the issue with health diagnostics, for example. AI will be able to do all sorts of things, but should it or could it replace human relationships and communication? I don't know, question mark.
Can I leave you with a thought to slightly reframe the debate? I do a lot of work with doctors, and I often say when I talk to surgeons, and I said that patients don't want surgeons, what patients want is health. And I say for a particular type of health problem, you're the best answer we've got today. But do you not think in the future people will look back and say it was incredibly primitive that we used to cut bodies open? Because the future of healthcare, and surgeons admit this, is non-invasive therapy and preventative medicine, not just robotic surgery, as most people think that AI is relevant for robotic surgery. And today, almost all our discussion has been about, metaphorically speaking, robotic surgery. It's been how do we do things today and how can technology and AI automate it? I think we've got a bigger challenge and, frankly, a bigger opportunity. The bigger challenge is to start thinking about non-invasive therapy. So how can we give people who have legal problems the results, the outcome they want in an entirely different way using technology, rather than simply replicating how we work? And secondly, and for me, always the best challenge of all, is how can we put that fence at the top of the cliff rather than the ambulance at the bottom? Preventative lawyering, by analogy with preventative medicine. And I have this sense that we can see some emerging techniques that may help us there. So when you go away and think about what you've heard, I discourage you simply to wonder, how can this automate what we as lawyers and advice workers and as people who need help do today? And think, might this allow us fundamentally new ways to solve their problems? And might this help us avoid problems in the first place? That's all we've really got time for. I want to thank Natalie Barham for helping put this together. I want to thank our technical support for making sure the whole thing works so well. Our panel, particularly Margaret, wonderful to have you over here. Your ways to Renate, to Jay as well. Thank you so much, and thank you finally to the audience for you coming to listen to us today. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.